The year is 2008. Dimension, the Weinstein Company, and Trancas are coming off of the box office smash success that was Halloween 2007. Although critics and fans alike were very critical of Rob Zombie's first foray into Haddonfield, Illinois, the money was there. A lot of people showed up, and Michael Myers was kind of at the forefront of the discussion again. So naturally, the powers that be are going to want a sequel. And boy, did they want a sequel. In October of 2008, at the 30 Years of Terror convention in South Pasadena, California, Malika Akkad spoke about the prospects of a sequel, saying that it was happening and Julian Maury and Alexandre Bustillo were to write and direct the movie. Now, these two French filmmakers were brought on to continue Rob's vision, continue his story with his actors, his characters, and complete their arcs, or at least just keep them going for a third, fourth, fifth film. And that was all going to be set to go because Rob Zombie wanted nothing to do with the sequel to Halloween. Well, that changed when one, Malika Akkad came to him and said, look, for whatever reason, there's something lost in translation with these directors. They're not fitting this world that you've created. We want you to come back. We want you to do a sequel. Rob had been considering it already because he did not like the prospects of somebody taking over his characters and he didn't want them to mess up their arcs. But what got him back in was Malika Akkad telling him plainly and in no uncertain terms, don't feel hindered by any of the rules we've had in the past. I want this to be your vision, and I want you to express that vision. That was all Rob Zombie needed. Rob had Malik's blessing to do whatever he wanted in this universe. To some, that was a terrifying prospect. Rob Zombie, the gritty, grimy horror filmmaker that already gave us a pretty gritty remake of Halloween, is going to get even weirder. For me, I said sign me up. But for a lot of people, it was definitely cause for concern. So pre-production began. Soon as Zombie was on board, Scout Taylor Compton, Danielle Harris, Brad Dourif, Tyler Mane, they're all back. They're all game. They want to do it. They loved Rob. Say what you will about Rob, his films or his music or just how he carries himself. I think he's a badass personally, but whatever. People love working with him. They've always talked about how they love working with him. So as soon as he was back, there was no second guessing in any of their minds about coming back. Now, pre-production begins, and Rob makes it clear that he wants a different tone for this movie. He wanted it to be, quote, grittier, violent, and a more realistic approach than the previous film. So in doing that, he didn't want to return to the sun-kissed streets of South Pasadena, California. He wanted a darker, more rural, more farm approach and look. Now, obviously, I'm exaggerating with the word farm, but there's a lot of farms in this movie. They filmed this in Georgia, and it gave him that look. A lot of rural settings, a lot of rundown businesses and abandoned buildings and fields and woods, and that's what Rob wanted. Now, it didn't hurt that there were tax incentives for them to film in Georgia, so that always helps. But Rob intentionally didn't want to go back to South Pasadena. And they were off. Filming took place, and I remember following along every day on Yahoo Movies and just any update I could get, any morsel of information, any behind-the-scenes photo. And there wasn't a ton that came out. And that was because, and Rob has spoken about this since then, this was the worst shoot he's ever had in his career. And it's not because he didn't like what he was doing, and it's not because Malika Akkad had tied his hands. No, Dimension and the Weinstein Company did. Rob still to this day has never faced studio interference like he faced with this film. Now, if you had to ask me, the reason for that is probably the different approach. It's probably the different tone, and it's probably for Rob throwing everything at the wall and seeing what stuck. Dimension didn't want that. They wanted it to be formulaic, by the numbers. Keep Michael Myers like he is, like we know him. Don't go too off the rails here. Love or hate this movie, you gotta respect Zombie for saying, fuck that. No. What's the point? We're 10 movies into this series. This series has been going on for 30 plus years. We have to switch it up. We have to bring new people into it. The fans are always going to show up. Even if they hate the movie, you, me, and anybody that considers himself a Halloween diehard, we're going to show up. But how do you expand that base? You have to try things that are different. How do you get people excited for a 10th movie in a slasher franchise? Switch it up. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Well, today, I'm here to tell you exactly why it works. Halloween 2 takes a different approach than a lot of mainstream Hollywood movies. Most of the time in these types of movies, after your characters suffer traumatic events or go through the ringer, it's always a redemptive story. How do they come out of it? Do they become stronger? Do they become more equipped to handle the evils of this world? Rob went into this saying, no. Sometimes they descend into madness. And that's the sad reality of PTSD. Let's look at Annie Brackett first and foremost. Danielle Harris came back to the role, and she's amazing in the role. And Annie Brackett is kind of like the mother figure of the household now. Laurie's living with her and her dad. Annie wears on her face every day the scars as a reminder of what happened on that Halloween. But she's trying to keep it together. She's broken, but she puts on a face for those around her to try to be strong, to try to be the reasonable one. Annie's descent isn't as pronounced as some of the others in this movie because she does a good job pretending, but it is clear throughout watching this movie and in Danielle Harris's performance, she is very much a broken woman. Some people just handle things differently. We go to Sheriff Brackett, again played by Brad Dourif, and what is one of my favorite performances of his entire career. See, he's got a weird situation. He's trying to take care of these two girls while also being the sheriff of this town and while also walking on eggshells every day wondering if Dr. Loomis is going to spill the beans about Laurie Strode. When is going to be the day that he announces to the world that that's Michael's sister? And is that going to be the final nail in the coffin in Laurie's descent? Most would tell you there's a safe bet that probably would be the final nail. Brackett, he's funny. He tries to be very fatherly. He tries to be there. But he's just another example of he just doesn't get it. And he can't resonate with these two girls. And he can't talk to them like he needs to. He's out of touch. And he's dealing with his grief and his trauma of seeing his daughter almost die brutally at the hands of Michael Myers. He's fearful. He's overprotective, constantly sending cops over to the house to check on Annie or keep watch for Annie, just because he doesn't want anything to happen to her. Dr. Loomis. Yes. Malcolm McDowell comes back. And this is a point of contention with a lot of people in this movie. They don't like the turn that Loomis took. They didn't like what Zombie did here. This isn't Dr. Loomis. Dr. Loomis wouldn't do that. Well, Malcolm McDowell and Rob Zombie both approached this the same way. They meant for it to be a complete 180 from the Loomis you saw in the first movie and in every other iteration of the character throughout the franchise. Rob Zombie found inspiration from Vincent Bugliosi, a prosecuting lawyer against Charles Manson, who became a sellout after that trial and sold his soul for money and feed his ego. He became an asshole. What was right and wrong didn't matter to him anymore. It was about money. And Malcolm McDowell loved that idea. And who wouldn't? We've seen this far too many times throughout our history. People capitalizing off of the misery of others because they were somehow involved in some way and they feel like, well, these people are dead. How are they going to, how am I going to have to pay for this? I don't. I can say whatever I want. And that's the mindset he has. Kind of makes sense if you think about it. Loomis thinks Michael is dead. Who cares if he drags his name through the mud? He can profit off of it. Like I said, a lot of people do. It's not right, but clearly in this movie, Loomis doesn't care about what's right. See, a lot of people's issue with Loomis is they say, well, this isn't the same Loomis. He's not after Michael. He's not the protector. He's not, well, because he thinks he's dead. Once he finds out near the very end of the movie that Michael is still alive, he goes there to try to save Laurie. Now, at that point, as the viewer, a lot of us are going, you're already too far gone, Doc. We don't trust you anymore. And maybe that's the right instinct to have. But to criticize the performance and the writing of the character, I feel like is a little unfair because to him, Michael is dead. That was his life's work. So what do? You write about your life's work and get rich and become an asshole and face no repercussions. So again, it's a different turn, but it's a very believable one. And just another example of somebody handling the trauma and grief from that night, and really for Loomis for 2 decades, a different way. There are minor characters throughout this movie. Laurie's got these new friends. One of them's very punk rocky, likes to party, likes to get drunk and hook up with boys. And one of them is like that, but she's a little more reserved. She's a little more motherly. She's a little more caring towards Laurie. But I wouldn't say either one of them are very good influences for a woman that's going through what Laurie is going through. Too often throughout life, we find when we're going through traumatic events or recovering from them, drugs and alcohol and anger are not things you want to lean into. And unfortunately, Laurie is. And she doesn't have enough people in her corner telling her not to. But that leads us to our 2 main characters. First is Michael Myers. Rob Zombie said that he wanted Myers to remain unchanged by the world around him. He wanted Michael to just be an animal that tries to find clothes to stay warm, find things to eat, and just kill because that's what he does. It's his instinct. He wanted Michael to have no concept of the world around him. Why didn't Michael shave his beard? Why didn't he get a new mask? Where's the new jumpsuit? To say that it's not for you is fine. To say it doesn't make sense is just verifiably false. How would Michael get these things? Why would he even think about that? He doesn't care. What is he? Does he have a photo shoot later where he's got to look his best? Prim and proper. No. He's an animal. He's unkept. He's roaming. He is unaffected by the world around him and everything that happens around him. Love it or hate it, it's a realistic approach to the character. And then finally is Laurie Strode. Now, Laurie Strode in this movie is, first and foremost, as Scout Taylor Compton and Rob Zombie put it, Laurie's appearance is her darkness manifesting itself externally. So before you even really get to know where Laurie is at mentally in her life at this point, you see her bedroom, you see her tattoos, her clothes, her hair. She's wearing it on her sleeve, quite literally. It's quite the juxtaposition from Annie, who does try to dress normal and act normal and pretend to be normal. Laurie doesn't even try. She wears it on her sleeve. Is that a badge of honor? Who's to say? But you know what you're getting before she even opens her mouth in this movie. Now, a lot of people don't like Scout in this movie. They say all she does is scream and cuss, and I just can't stand her. Well, to put yourself in her position, and I hope none of you have ever had to deal with what she's had to deal with, but to lose your parents, to lose your friends, and to almost lose your own life, and then later in the movie find out the person responsible for all of that is your brother, I can't imagine what kind of downward spiral that would lead a person on. And as I said earlier, she doesn't have the support system she needs. Yes, she has Brackett and Annie, but they're both broken too. How can you get help when those that you could get help from have the same issues as you do? They don't have the capacity to help themselves. How can they help you? It's one of those sayings where people always say, you have to love yourself before you can love somebody else. It's kind of like that in this movie. Laurie can't love herself. And the people that she does have in her inner circle either want to get fucked up and hook up with guys or can't even come to terms with their own grief, their own pain. So how can they begin to process hers? So as Laurie gets worse throughout this movie, it makes complete sense. Her PTSD isn't being cured at all. She's not being helped at all. She has nobody around her that can help her. You lose the support system that is your parents. You don't have them to go to. You lose some of your friends. You don't have them to go to. The friend you have left, they're already gone too, even though they're still alive. It frays your relationship. But hey, fret not. right? Because Laurie's seeing a therapist. That should help, right? Well, one, unfortunately, therapy doesn't always work, especially because you get the vibe in this movie that her therapist doesn't really understand her. And sometimes, if you've ever been to therapy and your therapist doesn't understand you, doesn't get where you're coming from, can't level with you, you start to get worse, not better. And that's what's happening with Laurie here. The one thing, the one saving grace that could potentially pull her out of this darkness, just doesn't know how. It's a sad reality, but it is reality. See, Laurie is lost. And the fact that Michael might still be alive, the fact that there wasn't closure there, is making it worse. She wants answers, answers that nobody has, answers she'll never be able to find. Closure is huge. Closure means so much to so many people in many different ways throughout life. Without that closure, especially from such traumatic events, how does she go on? It all goes back to the people you surround yourself with, the people you lost, the means you have to rectify these things. Throughout this movie, Laurie is behind the 8 ball in every single way. So the final nail in the coffin of finding out that Michael is her brother, it was almost destiny. She can't run from this. And it's the sad reality of sometimes what happens. Not every story is a redemptive story. Not every story is a success story. And not every story has a happy ending. Sometimes, unfortunately, life is just beats you down and beats you down until you can't take it anymore. That's what happens to Laurie Strode. So this entire approach that Zombie takes throughout this movie is to shed light on that. What would happen if these things happened to you and all that was left was a broken shell of a person and you had no one to turn to, and it just got worse and worse and worse? Is it a depressing outlook? Absolutely. Is it a fun watch at times? No. But it's not supposed to be. It's a character study. It's about what can go wrong after things that have already gone horribly wrong. What if our hero didn't get better? What if the sickness wasn't cured? Now, it brings me to the White Horse and Sherry Moon Zombie. And I'll just touch on this a little bit. The White Horse, although some may say it's stupid iconography and imagery in the movie, I've never been the biggest fan of it myself, but Rob Zombie spells it out at the beginning of the movie in the title card about what it is and why it's there. So if you're not a fan of it, that's fine, but to say it doesn't make sense is just not accurate. It's symbolism. When you see that white horse, you know what it's telling you. You're in Michael's mind, and Michael has lost his mind. He is a psychopath driven by rage and the desire to bring his family together again. Which brings me to Sherry Moon. Her inclusion in this movie is not necessary, but I don't think it hurts the movie. I just think it's there. I could go without the whole kill for me type thing vibe that you get from her in this movie. And do we really need her there telling Michael to find Laurie and bring them all together again? That's kind of been his goal since the first movie. We know that. We don't need Sherry to remind him, or us for that matter, that that's the goal. So, although I'm not a huge fan of her in this movie, I think it's really just there to kind of hammer home the obvious. I think it's made, unfortunately, for some of the viewers that might not have picked up on some of the symbolism, might not have really known what was going on. It's almost like Zombie threw it in there to say, hey, in case you weren't keeping up. So not necessary, but really it's not a big deal. People really harp on it like it's the end of the world. It's really not a big deal. Halloween 2 was a troubled shoot. It was a troubled shoot because Rob swung for the fences. Rob took Halloween down a path that we had never seen. The kills in this movie are ultra violent. but realistic. Practical effects, practical gore. It's not Hollywood. When someone gets stabbed, or someone has a fingernail ripped off, or someone gets slashed or shot, it looks real. It's not movie magic blood. You can sit there and go, oh my God, that kind of looks real. It does. It's a grittier, darker approach throughout the entire movie. The movie's shot on 16 millimeter, and my God, is it absolutely gorgeous. Gorgeous movie to look at. It is dirty. It's muted. Its color tones are muted, and I absolutely love that. The whites, the grays, the blues really stand out in this movie. Narratively and visually, and even in the audio, Rob is putting it out on Front Street for you. This movie's not supposed to be a pleasurable experience. This movie is not going to be a rah-rah, the hero survives at the end type movie. No. You're in for an hour and 40 minutes of pure mayhem, culminating in a psychotic break of a character that we want to see survive and be the hero. It's Rob Zombie saying, you're not going to get what you want. A lot of people say all the time, Halloween 2 is not a bad movie, but it's a bad Halloween movie. I'll never understand that. Halloween 2 follows a lot of the same tenets the other movies did. Laurie Strode, Michael Myers. Michael wants to kill his sister. It takes place in Haddonfield. It's set on Halloween. Michael stalks people and randomly kills them. What more do you need? It's just so different in tone. That's what people mean. It's not formulaic. He tried new things. Good for him. We talk about it all the time now in Hollywood, how we feel like we get the same things over and over. People love to say, why do we keep making sequels and remakes and reboots to old properties? Let's create new stuff. What about the best of both worlds? Taking an iconic property and injecting it with new life. That's what Rob did. The end of the movie is perfect. Now, I'm talking the theatrical cut. And that is, Laurie has accepted her fate. He's family. She's gone. There's no coming back from this. She's tired of fighting. She's tired. As we zoom in on her sitting on the bed in the mental institution as she turns up her head and smiles slowly into the camera, you get, it's haunting. It burns into your memory forever. Laurie's accepted it. She's home. She's with her family. She's completely lost it. Not the hopeful ending you were looking for, but beautiful and poetic. I guess my biggest issue I take with some of the criticisms from this movie is simply that it is so different, and it shouldn't be called Halloween. That's not Michael Myers. That's not my Michael Myers. To me, Michael Myers is just a figurehead. He's a name. Put whatever you want into that character. They do. Laurie Strode, same thing. We've seen Jamie Lee Curtis's portrayal and her arc that she goes on, trying to better her life. Let's see the flip side of that. What if she said, fuck it. I'm done trying. I'm done fighting. That's what Laurie does here. This movie is directed beautifully. It's acted incredibly well. Some of the most powerful scenes in this entire franchise, I would say, emotionally, are in this movie. When Laurie finds Annie and how heartbreaking that is. When she's dying in her arms and she's talking to her and she's saying, don't leave me. Please don't leave me, like you're all I have. It's sad because you know that's what Laurie had been wanting to say since that night to Annie. But she couldn't. She didn't know how to put it into words. She couldn't look at Annie because Annie's face, her scars, were a constant reminder of what they went through together. Laurie doesn't want to relive that. That scene is so powerful and moving. And then when Brackett finds Annie, imagine You got there just in time last time. Saved her life. Just to come this time and realize the same thing happened, except you were just a little too late. This movie is truly an experience. It is emotional. It is a gripping story. It is insanely well done from start to finish, with the sound design, with the cinematography, with the acting, with the settings, with the practical effects, with the tone, the music, the vibe. So I'm here to tell you this. If you don't like Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 because it's not your cup of tea, it's not a fun experience. It's grimy, it's dirty, it's depressing, it's just too different. I understand that. I'm also here to tell you that if you say that Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 is not a good movie, I say you're wrong. Objectively wrong. I think this is an incredibly well-made film. And for what it's going for, it nails it. What it's going for might not be what you want, and that's totally fine. But what it's going for, it succeeds. I think that this movie gets a bad rap because of how different it is. I think this movie is just misunderstood. I think a lot of people watched it one time and never went back to it. That's insane. That's just batshit off the wall. That's not Halloween. If you're one of them, I hope this video and this deep dive into these characters and into this movie and into the tone and the setting and why things are the way they are makes you appreciate it more, makes you look at it from a different perspective. Okay, what if? It's a what if scenario. It's a multiverse. The multiverse of Michael. It's essentially what it is. Instead of the characters surviving, instead of the characters having hope, what if that didn't happen? Does it make for a depressing watch? Absolutely. Absolutely. But that's kind of the point. Halloween 3D was going to come. Scout Taylor Compton was going to be a part of it. Tyler Mane was going to be a part of it. There was a script. They were weeks away from shooting. They were in pre-production. With makeup effects, Gary Tunnicliffe told us this on the Uneeda Horror Podcast. He was going to work on it. They were well into pre-production. And it got halted. Never got picked up again. A lot of people will say, well, it was because of the underperformance of Halloween 2. Well, Halloween 2 still made about 3 times its budget. So it profited. I don't think that really was what it was. I think what it was that when it became clear that Rob Zombie wanted nothing to do with the property ever again, as soon as they wrote a script and tried to do it, kind of like at the beginning of Halloween 2's inception with new filmmakers, just never felt right. Didn't work. If it wasn't going to be Rob playing in this world that he had created, nobody could. Tonally, visually, it just wouldn't work. For better or worse, we never got a follow-up. Selfishly, I would have loved to see Scout Taylor Compton in the role again. Absolutely would have loved it. I think she is phenomenal in this role. But realistically, I think they made the right decision. Halloween 2 was a perfect send-off to her character. She'd broken. Completely. She was gone. There was no saving Laurie anymore. While watching Halloween 2, you're hoping the entire time that there's going to be this redemption. There's going to be this breakthrough. That Laurie is going to come out of this because this woman does not deserve this. Sorry. Not all stories have happy endings. So I hope that going back and diving into this movie has been a good listen for you guys. I hope maybe it opened some of your eyes. And again, like I said, I hope it encourages some of you to go watch this movie again. But I'm here to definitively say Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 is not a bad movie at all. It nails what it's going for. And I think it can't really be argued at this point. Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 is a cinematic masterpiece.